Sexuality is a powerful thing. Attraction to another person can strike me speechless, or cause me to behave like an idiot. Sexuality drives much human behavior. So the power of sex should not be underestimated. On the other hand, neither should the power of sexuality be overestimated. Most of the things that most people do, most of the time, are not driven by their sex drive. It seems to me that as a society we both overestimate and underestimate the power of sexuality. For example, we overestimate it when we interpret anything and everything in terms of sexual urges, or group people together on the basis of their sexual preferences, and think that defines them. We underestimate the power of sexuality when we forget the interpersonal aspects of sex, and regard it purely as a physical activity. Sex is not just a physical activity. It is an expression of attraction to another person. It is an intimate activity, requiring us to reveal aspects of ourselves which we would not normally reveal. As a result, it very often has a significant emotional dimension. The damage caused by sexual abuse goes well beyond what is physically done. And even a casual sexual encounter can throw a person into a seething cauldron of longing, obsession, jealousy, and self-hatred, leading to behaviors such as love-struck mooning around, stalking, and jealousy-fueled violence. Because sexuality is powerful, it is sensible to treat it with respect and care. Consider pornography. If consenting adults want to do certain things, and be filmed doing those things, and if other people want to watch those films, that is all a matter of personal choice, and so I think all these things should be legal. Now smoking is also a matter of personal choice, and so I also think smoking should be legal. But that doesn't mean that cigarettes are good for you. And neither is consuming pornography. Why is that? Because pornography excludes the interpersonal aspects of sex. Internet pornography in particular enables you to access any sexual act, whenever you want, as often as you want. You can turn it on and off on demand, at the click of a mouse. There is no question of consent, or another person's pleasure. It is all about you. So what is wrong with that? Well, nothing, until you actually try to have sex with another human being. At which point you find that your partner cannot be sexually turned off and on at your pleasure, may not want to do many of the things that you have been watching on the internet, and has certain desires of their own, which they expect you to satisfy. All of which will frustrate you, if the use of pornography has conditioned your sexuality to expect instant gratification of any sexual desire on demand. What is the result? Habitual users of pornography are likely to have unrealistic expectations of sex with another person. They will have to retrain their sexuality, if they are to find such a relationship satisfying, which is difficult. Or they may retreat from sex with their partner, back into the world of pornography. Or they may try and force their partner to match up to their unrealistic expectations, which at best will be selfish, and at worst will be abuse. Similar issues arise when sex is commercialized. If you are paying someone to have sex with you, or perform specified actions for your sexual stimulation, then you are obtaining sexual pleasure from them on demand, as and when you pay for it. You are in control. Again, it is all about you. And of course, although you may pay someone to provide you with physical pleasure, money can't obtain the emotional satisfaction of pleasing someone else, who wants to be pleased specifically by you. For even though your sex worker may be adept at simulating a state of sexual ecstasy, and although you may suspend your disbelief for a while, if you are realistic then at the end of the day you know that enthusiasm was feigned. Indeed, you know that you paid for it to be feigned. And even in the unlikely event that it wasn't feigned, well, it could have been stimulated by anyone else who was prepared to pay. So, what are the implications of this? Well, if you choose to use pornography or prostitutes, that is your choice. But I think you are foolish to do so, and I will laugh at you. And if a friend of mine was considering embarking on a relationship with you, I would advise them not to, and tell them why. If you are a prostitute, or, what amounts to the same thing, a porn star, then your business is faking sexual attraction, which makes you a professional liar, and I will not trust you. Neither will I want to have an ongoing sexual relationship with you. When it comes to a long-term relationship, I want a sexual partner who desires me and only me, because I am me, not a sexual partner who will indiscriminately sexually perform for, or with, anyone, if the money is right. I should make it clear at this point, that I do not expect everyone to live a life of celibacy, until they meet the person who is right for them. Indeed, I think a certain amount of sexual experience is desirable in a long-term partner. I do not want to be in a relationship with someone who has no other points of reference, and so is constantly wondering whether sex with someone else would be better than sex with me. But I also want the fact that my partner is bestowing sexual favors on me, to make me feel at least a bit special. A prize too easily won is not valued. Now none of the points above are gender or sexuality specific. They are applicable to any sexual relationship. Indeed, I find the relentless labeling of people based on their gender and sexual preferences to be rather pointless. Sexual attraction exists between individual people, not groupings of people. If I say I am straight, what I mean is that all the individual people I have been attracted to in the past were female. I do not mean that I am attracted to all women. That would be exhausting. And although I haven't yet met a man who I am sexually attracted to, it is always possible that I could do. So categorizing myself as straight is at best provisional. It may be a useful way to brush off unwanted propositions from men I find undesirable, but it does not define me. I do not need to make a fuss about it. The reality is that I can have sex with any other consenting adult, and we can do what we like to each other. The law does not stop us. And modern society is accepting of that. But, despite this lack of boundaries, people still feel a need to label themselves as lesbian, gay, straight, or whatever. Now there are circumstances where such a label might be useful. If I am a man wanting to find a male sexual partner, then somewhere describing itself as a gay bar might be a good place to look. But, in most circumstances, the label is irrelevant. The idea that there is such a thing as gay culture, that all homosexual men have something in common other than their sexuality, is ridiculous. And it gets even more ridiculous when everyone who is not exclusively heterosexual lumps themselves together under the LGBT+ banner and talks as if they were all an homogeneous group. And then they talk about their allies in the heterosexual community, as if there was some sort of war going on between heterosexuals and everyone else. The reality is that my community consists of the people I care about, and whose company I enjoy. They are all individuals, and their gender, sexuality, race, and whatever else, is varied. The only thing they all have in common is that they are my friends. The labels are irrelevant. And, having labeled and defined people solely according to their sexuality, the LGBT+ activists also feel the need to relentlessly keep going on about it. I understand what they are saying. People do not have to be exclusively heterosexual. I agree, and, as far as I can see, so does pretty much everyone else. You don't need to go on endless pride marches, boasting about all the varied sexual practices you have tried. We already know. You might say that activism is necessary, because people who are not in heterosexual relationships still experience prejudice. That is true. So do people in heterosexual relationships. So does everyone. We all have characteristics that other people may dislike, morally disapprove of, or mock. We smoke, or we are fat, or we are black, or we are not Muslims, or we are female, or we support Sheffield Wednesday, or we wear lycra and ride a bicycle through a red light while looking smug, or we drink lager, or we are short, or we are left-handed, or we wear glasses, or we wear a suit and tie to work, or we are not vegetarians, or we are old and out of touch, or we are entitled little snowflakes. Take your pick. And if you want to reduce prejudice against gay people, is sticking a label on them and saying that they are all the same and intrinsically different to everybody else really the best way to go about it? And yes, sometimes prejudice manifests itself in violence, or threatened violence. And that is wrong, and should be punished. But it also seems to me that much perceived prejudice is imagined. After all, if you label yourself as gay, or black, or whatever, and then assume that everything that happens to you is a result of that label, then every time anyone is rude to you, or tactless, or selfish, you will assume it is because of prejudice. But usually, it isn't. It is usually because people are in fact simply rude, tactless, and selfish. So much for sexuality. In conclusion, I don't care what people do in bed, but I am bored of hearing about it. What about gender? There has been a lot of fuss about gender recently. It seems to me that there are two distinct issues here. The first is about transgender people, who are born into one gender, but choose to live their life as someone of the other gender. That is the serious issue. And then there are the selfish exhibitionists. Let us start with the selfish exhibitionists. These are the people who tell us that there are many genders. Indeed, when I recently asked the internet how many genders there are, it told me that there are 112. By now the number will no doubt be higher. This seems strange. After all, biologically there are two genders, male and female. I accept that, rarely, some people may be born with features of both genders, but that is a mixture of the two genders rather than a distinct gender. If there are 112 genders, they are not biological genders. So what are these people even talking about? Well, biology determines that women can get pregnant and can breastfeed. Biology also, for example, drives differences in average physical strength between the two genders. Because of these differences, in many societies certain roles were often filled by men, and others by women. So it might be that women stayed at home and looked after children, and men were expected to fight to defend the community. Thus particular activities, and the emotions associated with them, came to be associated with each gender. Now, as I keep saying, people are all different. It is therefore not at all surprising that most people do not limit themselves to emotions and activities traditionally associated with their biological gender. Why should they? So, if I feel caring and compassionate one day, and fiercely competitive the next, or if I enjoy both flower arranging and carpentry, from the perspective of social expectations it could be said that I have aspects of both genders. And for most people this is no big deal, it is exactly what you would expect. But for some self-obsessed people, who want to be treated differently to everybody else, this is a big deal. These are the people who announce that they are neither male nor female, but some other gender of their own invention, which they expect us all to acknowledge. Now, if you want to swan about telling everyone that you are gender neutral, or gender fluid, or that your gender is pulsating and celestial, then go ahead. After all, everyone is different, and so the fact that you are too is hardly surprising. And, yes, you are what you are, and you feel as you feel, and you can do what you want, as long as it is legal, and no one is going to care. But if you then announce that we all have to learn a new set of made-up pronouns, purely so that we can be allowed to talk about you, and that if we do not use those pronouns, or if we intentionally or unintentionally misuse them, then we are haters and should be punished, well, you can take a running jump. It is not reasonable for you to expect me to learn a new grammar, purely for your benefit, and castigate me if I do not. I am sorry, but you are just not that important, and I have better things to do with my time. And it is also contrary to the purpose of pronouns. The purpose of pronouns is for simplicity and brevity, to avoid me having to use people's names whenever I refer to them. If you multiply pronouns, and make me worry about which pronoun you would like me to use today, then I might as well just use your name. Anyway, enough of the narcissists. What about transgender people? Firstly, if someone feels that they have been born into a body of the wrong gender, and simply wants to live their life as someone of the opposite gender, that is fine by me. If that person wants to have surgery, or take drugs, to help them do that, again that is their choice. And if they want to be referred to by the pronouns associated with the gender they live as, that is also fine. Indeed, if they are living their lives as a person of that gender, it is natural to use those pronouns. To do otherwise would require a conscious effort, and would be intentionally rude. Now, I don't think it should be illegal to be rude to anyone. I believe in free speech. But that free speech also allows me to tell people who are being rude, either to others or to me, that I disapprove of their behavior, and find them offensive. And I do not choose to spend time with offensive people. And that will include people who deliberately misgender transgender people. So, what is the role of the state in all this? Well, I don't think the state has a role. We hear a lot that trans rights are human rights. I agree. Trans people are people and should have exactly the same rights as everyone else. What they should not have is legal privilege. The state should treat everyone the same, whatever their gender or anything else. If I want to live my life as a man or a woman, what has that got to do with the state? The state doesn't need to know my gender, and should not care about it. So, while a lot of fuss is made about when, and whether, gender changes are recognized by the state, in my view this is irrelevant. I note in passing that this point applies in other areas as well. If I make a lifelong commitment to another person in front of my friends and family, why does the state have to get involved? I don't expect the state to treat me any differently because I am married. Who I marry, and the form of that marriage, is ultimately between me and my partner, and, if it is a religious ceremony, my church. The state should have nothing to do with it. What about the daily life of trans people? Should they be treated exactly the same in all things as someone born with that biological gender? Well, most of life is not actually gender-specific, so most of the time the question is irrelevant. In some areas biology will still be important. For example, certain medical conditions are specific to a biological gender. I would therefore expect biological gender to be recorded in a person's medical records. And then there are questions such as whether a trans woman should be able to play women's sport, or use the women's toilet. Now, where sport is segregated on gender grounds, that is often because the sport depends on physical strength, and so most biological women are generally not able to compete in that sport equally with most biological men. In which case biological women will not be able to compete equally with trans women either. This may be a reason for excluding trans women from certain women's sports. But I don't think this is a matter that requires state intervention. Sporting clubs, and teams, and leagues, are all private organizations, and, as such, it should be left to them to decide who they admit, and on what terms. And if their decision is not to your liking, and others agree with you, well, you can always start your own club or team or whatever. Similarly, if we are talking about which toilet trans people should use, I suggest that is up to the owner of the toilet, and the conventions adopted by those who use it. One area where the state will have to get involved is when punishing criminals. Should a transgender woman be sent to a women's prison? Well, the only people who will really be affected by this are the transgender criminal, and the other criminals that they are incarcerated with. And prisoners are not supposed to enjoy being in prison. So, the flippant answer is, who cares? A less flippant answer would consider why prisoners are segregated on the basis of their gender in the first place. And I suspect that a key reason is to stop male prisoners from raping female prisoners. So, I suggest that anyone with male genitalia should be sent to a male prison. So far I have considered aspects of gender and sexuality in relation to adults. I now have some comments about gender and sexuality in relation to children. The first point is that prepubescent children, and indeed children passing through puberty, are not sexually mature. While they are aware of sex and gender, they do not fully understand it. That makes it easy to sexually exploit them, and society rightly protects children against this. So, there is an age of sexual consent, and it is illegal to have sex with someone who has not yet reached that age. This applies whatever the sexuality of the child. What about gender and children? Well, even very young children have a basic understanding of gender. They know that boys are different from girls. But they do not have a full understanding. And we need to be careful what we teach them. For example, some would teach our children that gender is a matter of personal choice, and that everyone can choose what gender to be, and if, say, you choose to be female, then it makes no difference at all, in any way, whether you are biologically a man or a woman. This is a very attractive view of things. Unfortunately, it is not true. There are clearly differences between biological men and biological women, and no matter how much you want to change your gender, no matter how many drugs you take, or how much surgery you have, these biological differences will not go away. We need to make sure our children understand this. We need to make sure that they understand that transitioning is not simply a matter of clicking your fingers and wishing it so. It is hard, the surgery leaves scars, and the drugs have side effects. We need to make sure that they understand that, although many who transition ultimately find contentment by doing so, others do not, and some actively regret having transitioned. We also need to be very careful that we do not label our children as trans, when they are not. I have known several men who as boys, and even later in life, enjoyed dressing in feminine attire. I have known several girls who preferred to dress in a masculine style, and enjoyed traditionally masculine pastimes. These people were perfectly happy with their biological gender. But an overzealous activist might well have decided that they were transgender, and sought to convince them of this. Many children going through puberty feel alienated from their body as it changes around them. We should not be creating an environment where they automatically assume that this is because they are gender dysmorphic. Some will shout at this, and say that a child will know if they are trans, in the same way as a child will know if they are homosexual. But we do not allow our children to practice homosexuality until they reach the age of consent. And we should most definitely not be allowing children to take puberty blockers, or take other drugs or undergo surgical procedures facilitating gender transition, until they are adult and capable of making these decisions for themselves. We do not allow children to be tattooed, or many other things, because of the long-term irreversible impact. Neither should we allow children to take drugs, or have surgical procedures, that have effects that are basically irreversible. Allowing them to do so is not kind. And encouraging them to do so is child abuse. Moving on from gender, and turning back to sexuality, we have created a world in which anyone can access pornography at the click of a mouse. To think that our children are not doing so is naive. Pornography is extremely addictive. It taps into very basic urges, which it is specifically designed to inflame. We protect our children from cigarettes, alcohol, and heroin, because they can be addictive, and do long-term harm. Should we not also protect our children from internet pornography, which is highly addictive, and the use of which may taint any future sexual relationship that those children embark on? Now, one way to stop children viewing pornography on the internet would be to remove all the pornographic material from the internet. I do not think that would be a good idea. The internet is great because it allows everyone to express an opinion. It enables people to access all sorts of information, learn new things, and explore different opinions and points of view. Even if it was practical to censor the internet, who will decide what the people are allowed to see, and what they are not? I prefer to make my own decisions. I do not think that censoring the internet is the way forward. But if the material is out there, how do you stop children from accessing it? It is easy to pass a law saying it is illegal for children to view certain types of material, but how do you police it? How do you stop children visiting pornographic sites and falsely certifying that they are adults? And the internet is international. How do you deal with material hosted in foreign countries, where the legislation you have passed does not apply? Given the current state of technology, any such law is likely to be very challenging to enforce, and widely disobeyed. These are not desirable features in a law. It strikes me that part of the problem is the anonymity of the internet. Now you may argue that this is desirable, because you value your privacy. But is it really reasonable that if I go online no one should know who I am, or what I am doing? After all, if I go down the road to the shops, then people can see where I go, which shops I visit, and what I buy. If I borrow a book from the library, there will be a record that I have borrowed it. Why should people not also be able to see where I am going and what I am doing on the internet? And it strikes me that the anonymity of the internet is one reason why it is filled with people defaming and abusing each other. More transparency might lead to more accountability, which might cause behaviors to change. If I knew that the malicious and libelous comment I leave on a website or social media can be directly traced back to me as an individual, I might not leave it. And if I do leave it, knowing who I am will allow the people that I have libeled to take action against me. And this seems only fair. So, it seems to me that what is required is some form of robust online identification, so if you are doing things on the internet, it is clear that it is you, a particular, identifiable, material, human individual, doing those things. And, to prevent fraud, there also need to be meaningful legal penalties for masquerading online as someone that you are not. Now, I don't know what this technology might look like, or how it might work. But developing it, and requiring its use, would enable lawmakers to develop proportionate and enforceable legislation in this area. Whatever we do, we should not fall into the trap of thinking that legislation is the only way to deal with these matters. Queue jumping is not, to my knowledge, illegal. But I am English, and if you push into a queue in front of me, I will make you aware of my displeasure. And so would most English people. And the result is that, around here, queue jumping happens relatively infrequently. And, in the same way, many teenage boys will be deterred from looking at pornography, if they know that, if they are caught doing so, their family and friends will roundly mock them for being inadequate losers. Social shaming works. You might say this is just bullying, and it isn't kind. Well, I would say that if you see someone doing something that in your view is likely to harm them or others, it is kind to point this out. And being robust in doing so helps to drive the point home. So, if I am in favor of mocking people, do I think religious extremists should be allowed to shout abuse at same-sex couples holding hands in the street? Yes, I do, as long as the religious extremists are not threatening violence. And I think the rest of us should be allowed to point out to the shouting religious extremists that they are being offensive and ridiculous, and laugh at them, and their stupid religion. In fact, I think that it is very important that we all do this, because if the only voices heard are those of the shouting religious extremists, we will end up living in a society where you will get abused if you hold the hand of your same-sex partner in public. However, if the religious extremists know that their shouting will immediately provoke mass and robust disapproval, it is more likely that they will hold their tongues, and we will end up living in a society where same-sex couples are not abused for holding hands in public, which is a society I would prefer to live in. People are social beings. They respond to social feedback. If people behave in ways you object to, and you do not tell them that you object, how are they supposed to know? If you want people to behave in a certain way, then you have to stand up and say so. If you want certain behaviors to change, then you have to challenge those behaviors. My view is that it is generally best to do this politely but firmly, without shouting, but you should challenge nonetheless. Now, of course, sometimes people will not change their behavior, even when it is challenged by a majority of the people around them. That is their right. So, if you are the one whose behavior is being challenged, it is your right to carry on regardless of that challenge. If you are not breaking the law, then the law should protect your person and property from threats or actual violence. And whether you change your behavior or not will depend on a range of factors, including your moral and ethical beliefs. So, what moral and ethical beliefs should you have? It is not my place to tell you that. Your morals are personal to you, and will depend on a wide range of factors, including how you were brought up, any religious beliefs you may have, your experiences, and any ideology you subscribe to. What about my moral beliefs? Well, I very much doubt that there are any eternal moral truths. But I do have certain strongly held beliefs that inform my behavior. For example, I believe that everyone has to make choices. I believe that we are each of us individually responsible for the choices that we make, and so for our actions, and the consequences of those actions. I believe that people are all distinct individuals, and should be treated as such, on the basis of how they choose to behave. I believe in telling the truth, keeping my promises, and being loyal to my friends. I believe that people should stand up for their views and challenge behavior that they do not approve of, while respecting the rights of others to do the same. I am committed to these beliefs. I have thought long and hard about them, and I believe that they are well-based. I will promote them and defend them robustly. Furthermore, I will use them as a yardstick to measure your behavior, and I will judge you and act toward you based on that measurement. But, while I consider that I have good reasons for holding them, I understand that my beliefs are subjective. People are different, and your subjective opinions may legitimately differ from mine. I have my yardstick, and you have yours. And both my opinions and your opinions may change over time. So, while I may fervently disagree with you, I try to keep an open mind. And, as long as your actions do not damage my person or property, I don't really care what you consider to be right or wrong. What goes on in your head is private, and none of my business. But if your actions in the physical world affect me, then I do care about that, and, if necessary, I will act to defend the persons and property of myself, and those I care about. I do not wish to give you moral guidance. But I do have some tentative thoughts on religion, which many people look to for moral guidance, and to bring these observations to a close, I will share these thoughts with you. Firstly, the idea of divinity is not in itself an unreasonable one. The idea that there are other consciousnesses in the universe that are more powerful than me, and that can materially affect me, is perfectly coherent. Indeed, I consider that it is quite likely. And it is a fact that there do seem to be forces external to me that can materially affect me. For example, falling in love can completely change the way I view the world. Falling in love is something that happens to me, not something that I choose to do. And I find it easy to believe that it happens because the goddess Aphrodite has laid her hands on me. Of course, you may not believe that. You may say that I am head over heels in love, and acting like a madman, because some aspect of my beloved, maybe her unique smell, has caused my glands to secrete certain chemicals, which are now circulating in my brain. Well, you can believe that if you want. But I believe that you are a dreary materialist. So, assume for a moment that Aphrodite exists. Does that mean that if I fall in love I am not responsible for my actions, and that I can blame whatever I do on the goddess? Well, no. After all, even when I am in love, I am still making choices as to how to behave. I have not ceased to exist. It is just that my worldview and priorities have changed. And that is not unusual. These things change all the time. So, God made me do it, is not a legitimate excuse. But if I believe that Aphrodite exists, and that she is powerful, then I will not treat her lightly. I will tread carefully in matters of love and lust, fully aware of the forces that I may unleash. I will be on my guard. And that is likely to lead to better outcomes for me. At least, I am less likely to get carried away and do something stupid. Another thing I notice is that there are several such forces. Aphrodite is but one of many gods and goddesses. And these gods and goddesses often strive against each other. So, if Ares provokes you to anger and violence, and you kill your grandmother in a fit of temper, you will have offended Hestia, who is the goddess of hearth and home and family ties. And gods and goddesses are not the sort of people you want to offend. Believing in these gods means that I am aware of each of them, and am wary of offending any of them. Which in practice leads me to try and balance all of these divine forces. I am therefore less prone to extreme behavior, and again, avoiding extremes generally leads me to better outcomes. So, I can see and feel the pagan gods acting in my daily life, and so I can have a personal relationship with them, and this can improve my quality of life. Paganism therefore strikes me as quite a rational set of beliefs. Compare this with monotheism. This says that there is but one God, and all other gods are false. But why should I accept this? I can see that there are many opposing powers in the universe. If these are not gods, and there is only one God, then that God must either be identical to one of these powers, or be distinct from them all, and somehow stand behind them. If only one of the powers I experience is God, then I would expect it to be clearly stronger than the other powers I experience. But this does not seem to be the case. So God must be distinct from the powers that I experience. In that case I have no direct experience of God, which implies that he has no perceivable effect on me. Surely I am better off worshipping the powers that do directly affect me, and can directly help or harm me. After all, I can perceive those powers, so at least I know that they exist. In fact, a monotheistic God is always a metaphysical abstraction. And monotheistic religions acknowledge this. They describe God as beyond human understanding, claim that it is impossible, or even impious, to attempt to represent God, and so on. But if God is beyond my understanding and forever out of my reach, How am I supposed to know what he wants of me, or have any sort of relationship with him? The monotheistic religions will say through faith. I have previously pointed out the reasons why this is profoundly unsatisfactory. And monotheistic religions are by their very nature intolerant. After all, if you believe that there is only one God, then anyone who worships another god, or gods, must just be plain wrong. This makes it very easy to justify oppressing and killing those with different religious beliefs. Compare this with paganism, which acknowledges that there are many gods, and so makes it able to accommodate other religions. So, what are the options? I can sympathize with the atheist position. I do not subscribe to it, because it is basically materialistic, and I am not a materialist. Indeed, the very opposite, I believe that matter depends on mind. My sympathies lie with the pagan, polytheistic position. It makes sense to me, and I can deal directly with its gods, without the need for priests or complex theology. I can't be certain that the monotheists are talking nonsense, but I think it is very likely. And many of the monotheists' particular beliefs I find to be both ridiculous and offensive. But that is just me. You can believe what you like. These observations started on very uncertain ground, with metaphysics. They end here, on equally uncertain ground, with religion. You may or may not agree with some or all of what I have said. That is fine by me. You are the one who has to choose what you believe, and how you act. And you are the one who is responsible for the choices you make. But I hope that you have found something interesting, entertaining, or even useful, in these observations.